I'm the founding director for a nonprofit collaborative accelerator, which is called the Consciousness and Healing Initiative. And we forward the science and practice of healing. And the way that we do that is to bring together the wisdom from all of the different stakeholders, you can say, who forward healing in the real world and who forward the science of healing. So we bring together scientists, we bring together healers with the scientists, educators, innovators, including technologists and artists, because each has a specific aspect of wisdom to share about the healing process. And so what we're doing is really reintegrating that wisdom so that we're not just viewing things from only one lens. So we're obviously very passionate about the science of healing. You know, all of our scientists are. And we also understand the need to ask the right questions. So for a long time, you know, we've been working with this pathogenic model, which is, you know, let's apply integrative medicine and healing techniques to mitigating symptoms in disease. Okay, that's great. I mean, there's nothing totally wrong with that. We need to alleviate pain where we can. We want to alleviate the suffering that's caused by depression and things like that. That's great, but there's so much more depth that we could be exploring when we're understanding healing if we're really looking at things from that salutogenic framework. That is, you know, what is the real process of healing? Instead of just looking at these as modalities or, you know, almost like a drug, right? It's like, let's just look at this drug and see if it gets rid of the symptoms. It's so much deeper than that, isn't it? And so when we bring together healers that are explaining to us what that process is, how do they foster healing in another human being, we begin to ask better and deeper scientific questions that are really going to help us to elevate humanity and its healing potential.
So even someone who might understand the body, a good doctor, for example, who's still really resistant to this idea of you know, not using just chemistry to affect biology, right? I mean, and if you could say, well, your cell phone is sending out frequencies and energy and information invisibly,
yeah,
you know, to satellites all over the world, and I mean, what we can do just with that, and I think examples like that, I feel like can help people understand maybe what we're capable of within ourselves in terms of the energy and information that's being exchanged in ways that may not be measurable all the time or, you know, is easy to see.
Yeah, it's really interesting because we find that technologists are actually, you know, more open to these ideas. So those in engineering and, you know, in other ways, because they are more comfortable with the concepts of energy and information in some ways. It's just been kind of a slow uptake in the biological sciences. It's been more of a slow uptake to consider the concept, as my colleague Richard Hammerschlag likes to say, we have Wi-Fi. What about bi-fi, meaning biofield, you know, fidelity, if you will. You know, this idea that we're communicating, you and I, at every moment, and my emotions may be felt by you. Your emotions may be felt by me. And if we're really tuned in, you know, we can tune into things that are even deeper. My spirit can connect with yours. And we can augment our healing processes together that way. So technologists are actually kind of open to those ideas, but when you bring them into medicine, it's just been a slower uptake because, you know, quantum biology is still a relatively novel and new concept. And there's new emerging data that suggests that, you know, you can see this type of coherence in biological systems. But again, that research is just beginning. You know, we can look at entanglement in microsystems, and we have been for a good decade or so. We're just beginning to look at entanglement in larger biological systems like plants. That work is just beginning. And so translating that work, you know, to the biological scientists is something that we need to do. And that's why forwarding what we call the transdisciplinary science of healing, which is what the Consciousness and Healing Initiative does, forwarding the understanding of healing in this transdisciplinary way is really going to help to move medicine forward. One of the reasons that we've always looked to food, diet, and, you know, we're okay with thinking about drugs affecting our bodies and being medicine, you know, and they can be, right, is because we have just been very rooted for the last several hundred years in this zeitgeist, if you will, of materialism. Right? That everything is based on the physical. And so it's been really comfortable for us to think about, well, I know that I can augment my healing practices, you know, my healing process by what I eat, or what I ingest and what I choose to ingest. And now we're learning that ingesting isn't just about ingesting physical substances, right? It's about our environment. It's about everything that we take in, literally everything that we're digesting, our relationships, our our surroundings, our own reactions, right? That's all ingesting, material as well, but it's not necessarily always physical, and yet it affects us. In undergraduate, I found myself really wanting to study the effects of music on healing and music on the brain and the body. And it wasn't actually until I had my first energy healing session in my 20s that I thought, oh, this is how one could study vibration, because I could feel it. When I had that session, it was so profound for me. I watched myself, I sort of watched myself experiencing something that was very palpable, that I could feel. I could feel this vibration in my body. And not only that, I could feel the link of that vibration with my emotions. All of a sudden, all this stuff was coming up for me. I was, being exposed to old thoughts, feelings that were coming up when this healer was placing their hands at a certain part of my body. And we weren't talking, right? So the scientist part of me was like, what is going on? This is fascinating. Something really amazing is happening here, and it's related to vibration. So I've done a number of studies myself on, exploring the impact of energy healing practices in cancer, in PTSD, and in other clinical populations, because, if we really want to move along the healthcare system in ways where we can integrate some of these practices for our patients, we do need the science. We do need to do those randomized control trials where we compare and explore, how healing works, and is it really effective? Does it help? And how does it help? Does it affect the immune system? Does it affect the hormonal system? So we do those kinds of studies as well. So one of the studies that we did was we explored whether a hands-on energy healing modality could mitigate fatigue and help with hormonal function in fatigued breast cancer survivors. It was a placebo-controlled trial. So we looked at this in the context of comparing that with a group of people who were not healers, who used the same hand positions, and who we asked to not intend to heal, which is an interesting thing in and of itself. That's not so easy to do. In turn, if you're sitting with another person, you tend to want to help them out, even if you don't call yourself a healer. So really what we were controlling for was experience. The experience of a healer who had been doing this for, many, many years. We had 4 different healers who had lots of experience working with patients, with skeptical scientists who were just mimicking the hand positions and kind of being there and touching. So there's a biofield effect. There's an energy flow effect that happens. But there's a difference in intention, the depths of intention, difference in experience. We compared those groups with a weightless control group who didn't receive anything. And then we looked and we found profound effects on fatigue. And we also found unique effects for cortisol variability, for the hormonal functioning of these survivors in a very positive direction. That was, basically the rhythms were more regulated, and it turns out those rhythms are linked to depression, fatigue, and even immune function in breast cancer. So we saw these improvements, and especially for the physiological, for the hormonal function, it seemed to be over and above the placebo effects. So that study's published. It's just one example. There are just a few studies, though, in this area, which is sad, honestly, because they're really promising. I mean, what the studies have been telling us, with studies that I've done, studies that other colleagues at major universities have done, there's such provocative data that's suggesting that these energy healing modalities, if you want to call them that, have these profound effects on spiritual well-being, physical well-being, and yet they're hardly being examined in the scientific field today because of this attachment that we have to materialism. This idea that, how could this be? This is a non-physical thing, this energy healing. We don't even understand the process. We don't understand what's going on. We know it has something to do with spirituality, but there's no physical substance, and there's no stretching. There's no needle. So how do we explain this? And because it's hard to explain, a lot of scientists just prefer we don't go there. And that's a real tragedy, really. And, sometimes people ask me, well, what you're studying is so abstract. They think it's abstract in a way, the consciousness. How do you study consciousness and its effects on health? That's such an abstract thing to explore. But it's not when it's grounded in experience, right? And it's so important because it's teaching us about our own power. We do the science because we're explorers. So we're inner explorers and outer explorers. We want to explore how far can we take this, and how much impact can it have on society. And so science is not only a beautiful language of explanation and expression and inquiry, it's just a language. It's just one method of inquiry. Just like spiritual practice is one, science is another. But what science can give us, if done properly, is it can help us to understand how repeatable is this? How reliable is this? How likely is it that a cancer patient is going to benefit from energy healing? So that matters. In the healthcare system, it matters a lot. And I think that's one of the gifts that science can give to this field, is really helping explore those questions in a way that, as much as possible, is unbiased and clear, and can help provide us with those answers so that we can improve the health of other people. For a lot of people, seeing the data, seeing the evidence, for a doctor, when they see the evidence, when they see a systematic review, a compiled summary of evidence, behind energy healing modalities, it helps increase the confidence that they might recommend that to their patient. And then what happens to the patient? Their confidence is now increased that they can heal themselves, right? Or that they can seek these types of healing modalities to augment their own healing process. So, there is that sort of trickle-down effect. And then you have the beautiful direct experience of, sitting with a healer or a meditation teacher or your own spiritual practice and opening up to that and instantly feeling that empowerment.
When you first encounter people that are new to your work, you have so much data and you've collected so much evidence, but when someone isn't familiar with that, do you find, it can be overwhelming where to even begin, right? To say, I want to open people's minds to these, just to even this work, or that this mind over matter idea is even possible, or intention is possible. Is there a place you start with people that are really unfamiliar?
Well, I think people get comfortable with science. If I start talking to them about the evidence and start talking to them about the new frontier science that is really undermining our view of the world, and I also talk to them about how science is a story. We think of science as a finite truth, that once we've discovered something, then that's it, and that's our truth, and that's who we are, and that defines how we're supposed to live. But science is an ongoing story, and every time a new chapter is written, it rewrites the chapter that came before. Well, what I try to do is explain to people that, the universe is sort of like unset Jell-O, and that when we think of the smallest elements of matter, we think of them as these hard little billiard balls, and that's what we're shown in, physics and chemistry classes. But they're not. They're just vibrating packets of energy, trading energy with other little vibrating packets of energy, almost like an endless game of tennis. And when you add up all of those little tennis games happening all the time in all the things in all the universe, you have this giant, unfathomable amount of energy and energy trading going on just out there in empty space. So we have to get past the idea that things are finite and stable. And also, the other thing to understand is that a quantum particle isn't an actual anything yet. It's just a potential of something. And it's only made and realized when an observer or a scientist takes a measurement or observes it. So that whole idea is huge. It is really that we co-create our world, that the world isn't possible without us. One favorite experiment of mine in our intention experiments that's kind of unassailable was an experiment to try to make seeds grow faster. And I did this with Dr. Gary Schwartz at the University of Arizona. He's a noted psychologist and has an entire laboratory at his disposal. They set up a very well-controlled experiment with 4 sets of seeds. They gave us photographs of the seeds. And I decided to use this as an experiment wherever I was in the world, running, at a conference, speaking at a conference, or running a workshop. So the first stop was Sydney, Australia. I tell the audience of 700, we choose the seeds, we send intention to the seeds, I tell them to plant the seeds, and lo and behold, the seeds sent intention grew significantly higher than the other 3 sets of controls. ran it 6 times in total. And then I ran it over the internet with my internet audience dispersed around the world. Every single time we sent intention, those seeds grew higher than the controls. Now, the reason I love this is that it's a real demonstration that we have a kind of psychic internet going on with the world. Also, we weren't sending intention to the thing itself, only its photographic representation. So when you think of that, that's just huge. That really demonstrates that we have some sort of virtual entanglement, as they call it in non-locality in physics. We have a virtual entanglement with things that we focus on in the world. I've run to date about 30 big intention experiments. 26 have demonstrated measurable, positive, mostly significant effects. There's no drug out there that has that kind of track record. So thoughts are an amazing, amazing effector. But the other thing I'm fascinated by, and that I've been doing a lot of work on, is the power of a small group to be healing and transformational. I've been putting people into these little groups of 8 and having them send healing intention to some member of the group with a health challenge. And we've had extraordinary effects. You know, I've been just blown away by a little 10-minute intention and how powerful it can be to absolutely transform not only the receiver, but the sender. Now that tells a very different story about our capacity as creators. And there's quite a lot of evidence for why this might be. I mean, there's a fascinating amount of evidence about the power of altruism and the power of praying for others. And there was a really great study by a guy called Sean O'Leary, who was both a psychologist and a priest. And he was really interested in praying for people with mental illness. So he wanted to see what would happen with people with depression. Would they get better if they were prayed for? So he advertised for a whole bunch of hundreds of people with depression. And he took the group and divided it in half, so that half of the people were people being prayed for, and the other half were the people who were doing the praying. And he taught them several techniques. They went ahead and did it, and then he calculated the results. Now, the people who were prayed for did well, but not as well as the people who were doing the praying. They did fabulously. And if you go on and you look at a lot of the evidence about altruism, you find that there's nothing like it as a bulletproof vest for ensuring a long and healthy life. Even people with conditions, when they start getting off of themselves and doing for other people with the same condition, they get better. I worked with a neuroscientist and we did groups of these Power of 8 groups, and we found a very similar brain signature time after time after time, which absolutely mirrored the same kinds of things that happen with people during these intense mystical experiences, like Sufi masters. Except in this situation, you don't have years of practice required. You don't have, rituals like sweat lodges. You don't have to take substances like ayahuasca. You don't have to stick your head between your knees or, prostrate yourself for years and years and years or learn any kind of major priming. You just get into a group and send a healing intention together, and major, major transformations happen. And so these kinds of brain changes, which are very similar to what people experience in a moment of mystical transformation, would explain why my participants in the large and small experiments had these extraordinary rebound effects.
The body extends way beyond the skin. You can find an electron on a person at least a football field away. So think about the invisible energy that we're made out of. The biophotons, teeny tiny little waves of light that come off the DNA, the biosounds. There's something in the body called phonons. They're quantum particles that organize like crystals in the physical body. And whenever there's a pressure wave moving through the body, they share the sounds that you're basically holding or thinking about inside. So if you're thinking about something negative, all this negative energy goes through the body, and it's been shown that you're less healthy. Your mental health goes down. Your body isn't, as healthy. The organs can't talk to each other and do their jobs. But if you're holding positive feelings or emotions or attitudes, then those little tiny quantum particles spread through the body, and you're healthier, literally. From a scientific point of view, the organs can talk to each other. Everything can coordinate. And, the physical body is healthier when these so-called, for most people, invisible energies, but they're really just subtle. They're just harder to measure. When they're in concert, every part of us is going to be healthier. So I think the more you kind of shift your perspective to one of gracefulness or gratitude, or believing in love while being honest about it, you do then even biologically, biochemically create more protectiveness for your body. And I'm emphasizing the word honest because if you've got some long-held resentments or regrets, or dark feelings, they're not bad feelings, they're just feelings, that you haven't felt. Literally, those form congestion or inflammation in the body. So they have to be felt. You have to deal with things. You can't just pretend problems away. As you work through those things, though, you can replace the more inflammatory or challenging, problematic energies, including microbes, including disease processes, including the beliefs that support, sort of an acidic environment in the body, which of course, leads to lower functioning in your immune system. You can replace it with healthier, cells, healthier thoughts, healthier ways of being, healthier ways of living, healthier ways of perceiving the world. So the body's naturally going to be healthier. See, biochemistry and subtle energy interface. One becomes the other too. So it's not separate. Psychic isn't separate from the physical. It's just a different level of energy. It just goes at different frequencies than physical energies. So I always like to talk to people about how we have a physical anatomy and we have a subtle anatomy, kind of visible and invisible, right? They studied a number of people who had issues in their body, pain, places in the body, and they shone light through those places in the body, and the light wouldn't go through it, wouldn't go through the chronically painful areas in the physical body, to a screen on the other side. Then they processed the emotions or the energies that were in those pain spots in the body. Not only did the pain alleviate, but the light could shine all the way through that part of the body.
How did they actually do that? Like, how did they get that emotion?
Touched the area, had the person feel the feelings, or talk about what might be in there. I mean, we're really deep creatures, and our subconscious, our soul, that primordial soup, that's our family patterning, that aces everything. So I can walk around going, I'm really happy, and underneath there's this Cindy that's going, I'm really resentful, and guess what's going to win? Right. Does that make sense? Sure. So it's not just about happy thoughts. I work really simply with that kind of stuff, though. So it's not, you can limitlessly dig for another problem, another issue, another way that you've screwed up or somebody screwed up on you, and that kind of thing. I really actually do believe in what I would just call the power of grace. I don't need to connect it to any religion, but I do believe that we come from the same source. That source is good. There's a place and a form and an exchange of love. And all the healers I have studied who have made a significant difference with people, it's not about the pill they gave them, though I still think we need to eat right. It's not about this or that or the other thing. It's that healer, was able to connect with the person, not even through words, often silently, and just help them open up in such a way that they allowed love in.
Maybe there's a way for me to have a perception that allows me to stay in a state of wellness, or
That's
achieve.
Good. That's perfect. It is about perception. I think everything comes down to perception. Yeah, that's all I really do is help people re-perceive or choose a different perception, even if it's just a little bit, to the left and they were standing on the right. That's ultimately the job, I think.
Okay. The idea of chakras is something that is very, I think, abstract to a lot of people. And are chakras actually measurable? are there tools that can do that?
That's a great question. To some extent, they've been measurable. There was some study done by Dr. Valerie Hunt and Rosalind Breyer years and years ago, back in the 70s, where they were actually able to, sort of manipulate those areas of the body in which the 7 main chakras are located and hear the sounds and figure out the colors of the different chakras. So I think most of the research, really went back to and started with that particular set of studies. And so, it's been much more difficult, I think, to measure chakras, to be really honest, than meridians. There's quite a bit of, I would say, more conclusive evidence, scientific evidence that there are meridians. They've been able to track, light that's been, really radioactive isotopes put in the meridian or the channels of the body, and watch the isotopes move through the body. There's a lot more demonstratable evidence, of the meridians, but all those systems really interact with each other, along with what is in my field called the auric fields, the energies that come off the body. And of course, we can see those too. There are, different kinds of, computer programs and, MRIs, et cetera, that are able to measure, and even figure out the colors of the different fields that come off the body. So I think chakras are probably the one, even though I write most of my books about chakras, the ones that are the least evidential, but they're also probably the most well-known in almost every culture.
And so if you're working particularly with someone, so many illnesses now are linked to gut health.
Yeah.
And so if you're working in the chakras around the gut,
Yeah.
Is that something that you're finding more commonly drawn to?
Yep, constantly. I could probably just work with, from an in-body perspective, the lower 2 chakras. The first chakra in the hip is typically seen as red. It's life energy, it's survival, it's about our abandonment issues, it's about being in the body and being healthy. So I typically work there because that's the physical kind of basin for life. Or like you're saying, the second chakra, which is emotional, which is the intestines or the gut. And the third, which is in the stomach, because that's where we have, as you're talking about, really, our enteric nervous system, which is where a lot of our emotions, stem from. So they're actually showing that a lot of diseases start with an imbalance of the emotions and the microbes in the gut. And those microbes can even travel up the body through the vagus nerve into the brain and create Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, and various disorders. So it's fascinating, isn't it? How the subtle and the physical energies all work together. And all these ancestors who talked about the chakras were really aiming at, looking and working with the physical body, of course, but also with the emotional self, the belief systems, and the sense of spirit, the sense of connectedness. I really think everything comes down to, do we think we're separated or do we know that we're connected? And all the chakras have their own role in helping us figure out we're connected, to something bigger and greater.